Welcome back to a universe of mystery. Today we're going to delve into the story of Hedges, a 38-year-old hunter that went missing outside of the crazy mountains in Montana. Now, Aaron grew up in this area of the country, out west. He was an avid hunter. He hunted this area his entire life. So much so that from years prior, he had caches hidden all over the mountains. That way, if he ever needed any supplies on a future hunting trip, he could go and uncover one of the caches and have what he needed, so he didn't have to end his trip early. Aaron Hedges was last seen on September 5th, 2014. Him and two of his hunting friends decided to go on a hunting trip to hunt elk right outside the Crazy Mountains. The Crazy Mountains get their name, or the Crazies for short, from a lore story about a woman whose entire family was killed by Indians, and she went after them with one of their own tomahawk axes and ran into the mountains, never to be seen again. So Aaron and his two buddies head up into the mountains, and it's bow hunting season at the time, so they all have to have bows with them, although they did have some guns for their own protection. Aaron and his two buddies had a plan. They were going to hike to a place called Campfire Lake. Now, you can't get close to this lake by vehicle. You can get to like the base of the Crazy Mountains by vehicle, but in order to get to this Campfire Lake where they were going to set up a base camp and stay for around 7 days hunting elk, it's a good ways hike. So what they did was, instead of having to carry all their gear on their person, they had two horses and a mule to carry their gear for them. Now, a couple miles into this hike, something spooked the animals. The horses went crazy, the mule went crazy, and the mule actually got away and ran off, spilling most of Aaron's gear all over the place. So now they got to stop, try and collect and salvage what kind of gear that they have, but Aaron was missing gear. But they figured this be no big deal because there were caches that they had hidden all over the place. So their plan was to just continue on with the hike to Campfire Lake, get a base camp set up, and the other guys had extra supplies, so supplies weren't going to be a big deal right off the bat, and they would be able to eventually uncover one of these caches and have extra supplies. So Aaron and his buddies get to Campfire Lake, and the weather is beautiful. All the reports say it was about 50 degrees, sunny. You couldn't just ask for any better hiking or hunting weather. So they get to the base camp, they get the base camp set up, and they stay there for 2 days. Aaron doesn't have a sleeping bag, so he gets tired of having to sleep next to the fire and getting cold at night. So he decides he's going to go find one of his caches. Around 10 a.m. the next morning, Aaron leaves his buddy and says he's going to hike up to a place called Sunlight Lake to retrieve one of his caches that he had up there. Now, he had a cell phone, a gun, and they had walkie-talkies. On the way to Sunlight Lake, there's a fork in the trail, and the trail is really well marked, really worn. It's really hard to get lost on this trail. So Aaron goes off to try and find one of these caches, and that was at 10 in the morning. So around 5 p.m., his buddies still hadn't heard from him, hadn't seen him, and they started to wonder where he was and if he was okay. And they did have these walkie-talkies that are hooked through a GPS system. So when you walkie somebody, and they respond, it sends the actual coordinates of where the person is responding from to the other walkie-talkie and vice versa. So it's really kind of hard to get lost this way because they know exactly where each other are. However, what Aaron was saying, his buddies found really hard to understand. They described it as like garble, talking nonsense. They couldn't really understand what he was saying, but they did hear him, and they knew he was still alive, and they had his coordinates. But what gets really weird is the coordinates that they were sent on the walkie-talkie showed that he was going the wrong direction. He had taken the wrong fork in the road, and somebody with Aaron's outdoor experience, that seemed like a real trivial mistake for an experienced outdoorsman to make. So they became concerned. So they waited another few hours, and later that night, before they were getting ready to go to bed, they tried to radio Aaron again. However, this time there was no response on the radio. So now his buddies wake up the next day, still no sign of Aaron, and now they can tell the weather is starting to shift. There's a bad snowstorm about to move in, but they decide, let's give him another day in case he comes wandering in and shows up with his gear, and then they could all leave together. So they wait around another day, And now the snowstorm starts to hit, and basically Aaron's buddies were forced to pack up and leave because they just weren't prepared for that kind of weather, and they weren't able to survive properly out there on their own in a huge hellacious snowstorm. His buddies get off the mountain, and over the next 12 to 24 hours, almost 2 feet of snow gets dumped on this mountain. So now they really begin to worry, and they go and they contact the authorities to get started a search and rescue mission. So now the way these mountains are set up, 2 counties were actually involved in the search and rescue. And they included search and rescue teams, helicopters, and scent dogs to try and pick up a scent or locate his tracks. The search team searched for 2 days, and while one of the teams is coming back from the search area, a place that had already been searched, they come across a campfire. And at this campfire location, they found his camelback and his boots, which were neatly stacked right next to the campfire, and also a pack of cigarettes that were in the campfire that was Aaron's brand. And another weird thing that they found was in the campfire, his backpack straps, not his backpack itself, but the straps that you strap the backpack around your front side with, were laying about halfway in the campfire, and they were about halfway burnt. And perhaps the weirdest thing of all, because it had been snowing, there were no tracks to or from this location where the campfire was. No footprints, no trail, no anything. It was as if somebody had just picked Aaron up out of the wilderness and he just vanished. The search teams included 60 individual searchers, 2 helicopters with thermal imaging, and they brought in 20 different canine search and rescue teams to try and pick up a scent or trail or anything about Aaron, and they couldn't find anything. Now, let's fast forward 9 months later. Winter's over, all the snowstorms have passed, and there was a rancher, and the way the crazy mountains are set up is it's mostly surrounded by private property, private ranches, farms, things like that. So 9 months later, a rancher is out just inspecting his farm. He's about a mile away from his ranch, checking on some fences, where he sees that someone, a hunter, had left his backpack. So he wanders over, just thinking a hunter had just left it there, and he picks it up and looks inside of it. He found Aaron's ID, a .44 caliber pistol, some nutrition bars, water, and other basic supplies. And the way he found the backpack was weird, because it was like it was gently placed next to the tree, like somebody had gone out of their way and took care in actually placing this backpack. It hadn't looked like it had been there all winter through the elements. It looked brand new, sitting next to a tree. Close to where they found the backpack, they also find a thermostat, which was Aaron's, and an energy drink that was about half drank, sitting next to the thermostat on a stump. Now this was really weird, because the location they found this thermostat in, you could physically see down the mountain, a ranch, a creek, everything you needed to get help. If he was truly lost in the wilderness, looking and needing help, help was right there, about a mile away. He could see it with his own eyes. Why would he choose to sit there and stare at it from a mile-long distance and sip on an energy drink? So after finding his backpack, these ranchers, they find no trace of Aaron himself, just some of his possessions, his ID, his pistol. Now fast forward 23 months later, almost 2 years later, that same group of ranchers, they were up doing more maintenance on their ranches. They were on horseback going through the trails. And as they're riding, one of them looks over and he spots a skull sitting underneath a tree. And now a weird thing about this was the skull was in almost perfect condition. There was no obvious signs of trauma. It was just sitting there, white, glowing white, like it hadn't been sitting there for almost 2 years in the elements, in the weather. So the ranchers, after finding the skull, the ranchers contact the local authorities, the sheriff's department, and the sheriffs come up to the location, and they end up finding a few of his ribs, his pelvis, and a femur bone. They also found his coat with his cell phone in it, sitting not too far from where the bones were located. They never found his pants, socks, or any other shoes, which was weird, because there was no way that Aaron could have hiked miles barefoot in that terrain. The mountains are full of jagged rocks. There is absolutely no way you can make that trip barefoot. Because if you remember, his boots were already found neatly placed by that campfire location that was a couple miles away. Now, the coroner report on his death certificate states that he succumbed to hypothermia and exposure to the elements. And sometimes with hypothermia, there's something that's called paradoxical undressing, where people that are in severe stages of hypothermia, they start to feel like they're burning on the inside, and they mistake the cold for heat, and they start to take clothes off, hoping to try and cool off. But this, of course, just makes things worse and speeds up the hypothermic process. Now, about his boots, it is not uncommon for hunters to carry 2 sets of shoes, because when you're trekking through the wilderness, you do need a pair of heavy boots to really protect your feet. But if you come across an animal and you're going to hunt for game and possibly stalk, it has been known that hunters will switch their shoes to make it more quiet. They'll carry a lighter pair of shoes so that when they are stalking the animal, that they don't make as much noise. So this could explain why his boots were found a couple miles away. Maybe he came across an elk and he had his bow and it was bow hunting season. Maybe he didn't have a good shot, so he decided to stalk the elk in his other pair of shoes for a couple miles, which could explain why his body ended up miles away from where his boots were found. However, it doesn't explain why he was within a mile of help that he could physically see with his own eyes, why he didn't go one more extra mile to seek help. Instead, he sat there and drank half an energy drink. This is definitely one of the stranger stories I've done that leaves so many questions unanswered. I've tried to wrap my head around all the weird and anomalous parts of this story, but I have no answers. What do you think happened to Aaron? Let me know in the comments below. The story of Aaron Hedges, the well-regarded hunter, went missing in the crazy mountains in 2014, highlights the challenges of search and rescue in remote and rugged terrain. Despite the extensive search efforts, the mystery of what happened to Hedges remains unsolved. One of the key lessons from the Aaron Hedges story is the importance of being prepared when venturing into the backcountry. Hedges reportedly became separated from his hunting companions on purpose and was unable to find his way back to the base camp. It's a reminder that even the most experienced outdoorsmen can find themselves in dangerous situations, and that having the right equipment, knowledge, and survival skills can make all the difference between life or death. Another lesson is the importance of prompt reporting in a missing persons case. In Hedges' case, there was a delay in reporting of his disappearance, which may have hampered search efforts. In general, it's crucial to report a missing person as soon as possible, so that search and rescue teams can begin their efforts before crucial evidence is lost or weather conditions worsen. Finally, the Aaron Hedges story underscores the difficulty of the search and rescue operations in remote and rugged terrain. Even with extensive resources and expertise, it can be incredibly challenging to locate a missing person in these areas. It's a reminder of the need for continued investment in search and rescue capabilities and technology, and for the importance of supporting the dedicated professionals who work tirelessly to find missing people and bring them home to their loved ones. If you've enjoyed this content, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe so I can continue to bring you these mysterious stories.